So, you know, you started off as an international person. You were born in China, is that right?
Well, that's where most people are born.
Yes, I guess that's true.
My mother was born there too.
Uh-huh. And what were your parents doing in China at the time?
Well, my mother's father was founder of one of the founders of Peking University. My dad was a Canadian zoologist. He went to China to teach zoology in Chinese. And the Chinese professors at Peking University said that he does Chinese better than they do. He was a fussiest, you see. We kids all learned Chinese with our mother's milk, and my mother learned Chinese with her mother's milk. And my dad wouldn't put up with the way we did it. He was a fussiest, you see. So that's why the Chinese professor says, you do Chinese better than we do.
So when did you come to the U.S.?
In 1927.
27. You were about 22 years old.
No,
I'm sorry, 7 years old.
I was 11 and 300 days or something. I was a few days less than 12 years old.
12 years old. My math is escaping me today.
And it took us 3 weeks to cross the ocean in the ship.
And so, I'm sorry, I got a sign. You came here when you were young. Was that in San Francisco then?
Yes, came to San Francisco. I've been in San Francisco since most of the natives were born.
And so you were in San Francisco for quite a long time then?
Yeah, till I had this stroke.
And you moved down here after the stroke 2 years ago?
No, I was here before I had the stroke. I was here when I had the stroke, or I wouldn't have been still here probably. I don't know.
And supposed to get a question here, but it's not showing up. So
it's on Skype. Saying no.
No,
I can tell you what they are probably.
Okay.
If I can. Gosh, where are they? I guess I can't see.
So what were your interests when you were younger?
Well, out in China, my dad had one of these stupid refractors, you know, these big long brass things.
Oh, when you were young.
Had one of those things. So we used to see the moon and things, and Jupiter's moons and stuff, when I was a little kid, yeah. I remember when I was in grade school, I made these big blue pictures, this big pictures of Jupiter and its moons on different nights with that stupid refractor.
So you were following the footsteps of Galileo.
Well, we had a telescope that would beat Galileo's, but that's not difficult to do. We don't have broken binoculars that won't beat Galileo's.
Okay, well, I'm getting the questions now. We have one from Robert, and his question is, what's your most memorable moment in Sidewalk astronomy? He's asking from New Zealand.
Oh, Lord, I don't know how to answer that. I don't know how to answer that. The moments are so numerous. We've run that 24-incher for more than 80,000 miles. I couldn't tell you which particular thing stirred me the most. But some of the questions are very interesting. And I can tell you some of the questions, some of the answers, some of the questions that have shocked me. And about 3 years ago in San Francisco, I had a telescope on the moon. And the moon was a little fatter than first quarter. And this lady looks through the telescope, and she says, "What's shining on it?" I took for granted that people knew that the sun shines on the moon. No, she doesn't know that the sun shines on the moon. She looks through the telescope and finds that the moon is lit on one side and wants to know what's shining on it.
Well, it's at nighttime, so she doesn't know the sun is still out there, I guess.
You see, the American public doesn't realize that from new moon to quarter moon is 1 week. From quarter moon to full moon is another week. to third quarter is another week, and to new moon is another week. They don't realize that the moon is turning with respect to the sun. It's not turning with respect to us. The tidal effect of the Earth on the moon have stopped the spin of the moon with respect to the Earth, not with respect to the sun. And the tidal effect of the moon on the Earth are slowing down the spin of the Earth, and the angular momentum of the Earth's spin has to go to the moon's orbit, and the moon's going away a little over 2 inches a year. So if you want to see the moon, do it soon.
Yes, indeed. Well, you know, Don, we have some comments too. Johannes from Austria says when you talked about traveling around sleeping in the telescope that so it sounds to me like your story is like the old Greek story of Diogenes, and to him you are also a kind of philosopher, an open-minded thinker.
Well, at least I see that there are other things to talk about besides the things that you can walk on.
That's good. John, we have some questions from India, too. I guess I'll read them to you. And one is about what F ratio you think is more helpful for deep sky observation if you're using a Dobsonian telescope, and what aperture?
Well, you need a big aperture, but you also need a long focal length. Your power goes up easily if your focal length is long. It's hard to get the power up if your focal length is short.
You've always favored longer focal lengths, F6
yes.
or more.
Our 24-incher is not a little stubby thing. It sleeps 3 in the tube. It used to sleep, we don't have that tube anymore.
Yeah. So, you know, along with finding materials that you could use to make telescopes out of anything you could find, you had sort of a simplified method for testing your mirrors as well. You did it in the telescope, I think.
We do, yeah, we test the mirrors in the telescope. After we do the grinding and polishing, and we have it, what we think is close to the right curve, we put it in a telescope and throw it out of focus on both sides and see what's the matter with the mirror. Then we take it back and put it on, and then we put it back in the telescope and read it again. That's how we do it. We usually use, if we're working in the daytime, we look at a glint of sunlight on a power pole insulator. A glint of sunlight in a power pole insulator. Oh, I have to tell you a story. I gave a talk to an astronomy club in someplace in California. And, no, it wasn't in California. Someplace in the United States, but not in California. And the people who put the Hubble telescope up there when it didn't work were in the audience. I'm talking to an astronomy club. Anyway, they were in the audience. And I said, I could have tested the mirror. I could have tested the telescope for $1.50. And they clapped and they laughed. And they clapped and they laughed. They knew I could have tested it for $1.50. All I needed is a Christmas ornament hanging in the sun. But you see, those people don't look through the telescope when they test it. They do one curve at a time, and they have other ways of reading the curve. They never look through the telescope.
But that was a very big mirror, though.
Yes, I know, but that doesn't keep you from reading it on a power pole insulator.
Well, what's the biggest...
But at night you can use a star. You see, at night we use stars. But in the daytime, the sun is also a star, but you got to get a little tiny image of it.
Yeah.
So you do that.
And that brings us back to Austria. Johannes in Austria wants to know, what is the biggest size telescope that you've ever made?
The 24-incher is the biggest one I ever made and actually used. I've pushed glass on bigger things at Stellafane, but we never made a telescope out of it.
And even Rob in the studio has a question for you. He wants to know if your family, your parents, we know, shared your passion for astronomy. At least your father did. He had that refractor, and you have a son also who made telescopes very early on.
He made a telescope when he was 7 years old, and it's a very good 6-incher.
And that's Lauren.
That's Lauren.
In his 30s now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But when he was very small, he saw me running my glue bottle making a telescope, you see in the room. So he takes his milk bottle and it goes all over the linoleum floor. I can see how it works.
That's good. We have a couple questions from David Ingram here in the U.S. One is he wants to know your impression, your thoughts on all the extrasolar planets being discovered now, planets around other stars.
Well, what they're discovering I would call stars and not planets. They call Jupiter a planet. I call Jupiter a star. Jupiter has 80% of the angular momentum of the solar system. Now, if it were a planet, that means you gathered up the angular momentum from all these other things and dumped it onto that one? No, you can't do that.
Okay.
Jupiter is made of the same stuff as the Sun, and it came down with the Sun. Jupiter and Saturn came down with the Sun, spinning lickety-split, and they're still spinning lickety-split. Right. The Sun was able to slow down because it shines in the ultraviolet and knocks the electrons off the atoms nearby. So it has, its magnetic field has something to push around, okay? But Jupiter and Saturn can't radiate in the ultraviolet and knock the electrons off. So there are no electrical particles around Jupiter and Saturn for them to transfer their magnetic field away.
Well, there's been a debate for quite some time about the definition of a planet. You've just complicated it, I think.
No, I'm simplifying it.
Oh, okay.
They're on the wrong trip.
Oh, well, okay. And
you see, there's no way to gather up the angular momentum and put it in Jupiter. There's no way to do that if it were a planet.
Okay.
All the observational evidence is on my side.
Okay.
All of it.
Okay, well, I have nothing more to say. David has another question, too. If you're aware of your students after they learn to make telescopes from me, what are the most successful ones? Are there some that went on to telescope making or other things in astronomy?
Quite a number of them have been, yes. One of them just recently retired as senior optician at Lick Observatory, yes, sure.
Oh, wow. And he started learning from you?
He's one of us, yeah.
He's one of you. That's great. Is he still doing Sidewalk astronomy as well?
No, I can hardly walk, let alone get a telescope out for the public. Once in a while, Donna gets me out with the telescope. And I sit around hoping people will ask me questions, but they won't. So I ask them questions. I'm still willing.
What type of questions do you ask them, and why?
Like those ones I told you. If you lived on the moon, how often would the sun come up?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Maybe 1 in 25 people will answer me only once a month. Most people don't have any answer at all, and they just, every day, never, always, all these funny answers they have. They don't notice that the moon is lit by the sun, and it's not lit all the way over all the time. You see it at quarter, but they don't realize that that's because the moon is turning with respect to the sun. They don't see it that way.
Well, they don't, most people don't look at the moon. I mean, that's one of the things that you're doing is getting people to consider beyond what
yes,
we're
but with
used to
their
seeing.
bare eyes, they can see quarter moon, and they can see full moon. They can see all those things with their bare eyes.
You can, but
they don't worry about it.
they don't worry about it. They have their job.
If they
or
can't
school.
stub their toe on it, they don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.